No. Can you hear me now? Perfect. And so a lot of what we're going to talk about is just what I've learned as a parent myself, as well as 25 years of working with parents. I consult with a lot of school districts in the area on mental health for students and families. I also work with a lot of families, and I thought I heard a child crying. Oh, is that a cat? Oh, it's okay. It's an ambulance. And it's funny when, she was saying like there's going to be a presentation at 7. I'm thinking, isn't it 8 o'clock right now? I mean, it's so dark out. And when we think about mental health, this is my busiest time of the year. This is the hardest time for whatever reason. October every year, November, the season, the light. It's the hardest time a lot of times for families, for students, but also for our educators and our teachers. It is the time where we see a lot of like fatigue and even like burnout. And so it is really a time to be kind to one another. And I always, joke and I have 32 therapists and I always ask them how they're doing. And we do a lot of check-ins, but the last 2 times I was here, I asked you all, and how would you say you're feeling tonight? Which one? Yeah, where would you say? Like, are you surfing the waves or are you like underwater? You're surfing the waves? Caught in a riptide. It's funny because my 2 girls are 25 and 26, and I taught them a lot, but really they learned from me. They act just like me, and I don't think they listened to much of what I said. So we model for them how they're going to learn to behave. We model for them how we manage our own mental health. We model for them how we set boundaries and limits. And it's important that we're aware of how we're feeling. We're not perfect. You're going to, there's definitely many days that I was caught in a riptide and, got into a power struggle or yelled at my kids, a lot of mistakes. But one of the things I learned for me that worked the best was just always asking myself when I was approaching my kids, am I in a state to be approaching my kids? Is this more about me, what I'm upset with, or more about them? 9 times out of 10, I would walk away and not bring the topic up again until I was in a better place, if I was feeling exhausted or caught in a riptide or frustrated. Because what happens if you're really emotional and you're frustrated and you're like walking really quickly to go yell at your kid? What's going to happen? Well, they're scared, but you're going to end up saying things that you regret. How many of you have said things that you regret, right? Right? We say things we regret, we walk away, we're like, why did I do that? That was stupid. And so the more you can be aware of what's going on for you, the more you can model and kind of just decide, do I want to even have this conversation? And they're going to push all your buttons, especially if you have like a middle schooler, they know how to like push the buttons. You just have to like practice like walking away. And if you can and come back, and I'm not saying don't come back and hold them accountable, but when you do come back, then you can actually hold them accountable versus getting into this fight with them. And it's just about understanding what your hot button is. We all have one. Disrespect is one a lot of parents say. When my kid is disrespectful, a lot of parents will say when that child starts to walk away while they're talking, they get really upset, and that's a trigger for them. But a lot of times that child is walking away because they need a break. So you have to kind of understand what's going on for the child and have some form set up so that when they are feeling overwhelmed, because we can be overwhelming as parents. When they're overwhelmed, they understand that they can take a break. And how do they do that? For some parents, it's lying when kids are not telling the truth. That's their hot button. Sometimes it's when kids don't listen. Sometimes it's when kids don't go to school. Sometimes our hot button is when our child looks anxious. We start to feel sorry for them or feel guilty that maybe we did something wrong. Maybe our child's getting bullied or doesn't have friends. You might feel sorry for them, and that might be your hot button. So think about like, what are situations that cause you to emotionally react? What are situations that cause you maybe to like throw logic out the window and respond in a way that you probably later could say, okay, that might not have been the most helpful response. Really, I work with a lot of kids of all ages. I work with a lot of athletes and high achieving kids too, all the way through kids who refuse to go to school altogether. we're really working on identifying what is the behavior we're concerned about and what's reinforcing the behavior. My favorite is I had a kid in 6th grade come to me and the school said, I need you to work with this kid. He's in our nurse's office all day. He's like, goes there like 30 times because his stomach hurts and he's anxious. And when he's not in the nurse's office, he's in the counseling office. So it's interesting. What do you think my first thought was? Bully. Well, if I was in 6th grade and I was allowed to go to the nurse's office 16 times a day in the social worker's office, I would have been there. So my first thought was somebody's obviously letting him go. So I need to talk to this kid and find out like what his perception is, because obviously this is something that's being allowed. So I asked the kid, I said, okay, you're anxious. Why are you going to the nurse's office? And, you know, in my head, I'm thinking that's the germiest place for an anxious kid to want to be. And this kid doesn't like throw up, so he's hanging out in the nurse's office. And he said, she's really nice. The nurse is really nice. I like the nurse. She's nice. And they told me when I'm not feeling well or when I'm anxious to go to the nurse or the social worker. And this kid has stomach aches all day long. So every time he starts to focus on his stomach, he gets up and he leaves and he goes to the nurse to tell the nurse he has a stomach ache, and the nurse is really nice and she talks to him. And then he goes to the counselor's office and she's really nice too. So they're concerned and they want the behavior to stop and they want the 11-year-old boy to do something, but we had to do something different as the adults. And so I taught him, I said, you can be anxious and be in class. In fact, I want you to practice being anxious and staying in class. I don't want you, once you kind of practice, I taught him how to write some things down and I'm going to show you. And it was really uncomfortable for him. But interestingly enough, he has not gone back to the nurse's office, maybe once in the last 2 months. And this is a case that I did not need to see a lot. I've worked with him and he's really he needed to understand the why and kind of what the reason was. And I worked with mom on days that he was not staying in class. His video games were limited a little bit. And for him, that was enough to kind of work on that. So one thing is, whenever we're trying to do something, we have to recognize when we're overwhelmed, a lot of times it can be because we have too much stress, but sometimes it's because we lack practice with something. You know, sometimes it's because we're not confident in ourselves and our ability to do something. Sometimes it's that we're worried we're going to disappoint others, we're going to make a mistake. What are our expectations? This little boy, his expectations were not to make mistakes and be perfect. He was like a perfectionistic kind of kid. But really working with our children on what is realistic, what is for you. You know, maybe it's a child that struggles in math. They have a hard time focusing, setting goals and realistic expectations for them that they can meet. And a lot of times how we respond to them says a lot about what we care about. And I always ask kids, what do your parents think is important? And the kids will say, well, they care that I get good grades, or they care that I'm popular, or they care that I this. And the parents always say, well, that's not true. That's not what I care about. But they pick up on what we care about through our comments. Do you guys know what I mean by that? Like, what's the first thing you say to them after you haven't seen them, you know, after their school day? What do we ask about? What do we focus on? You know, I had a mom and the kid got a B on something and the mom said, what happened? Was it hard? And so part of it is reinforcing the things they're doing to kind of gain that resiliency. Are they bouncing back from mistakes? Are they going to school even though somebody was mean to them the day before? Are they able to go and deal with a teacher that they don't like and be able to find a way to communicate with that teacher? Problem solve. Had your kids come to you with a problem? And some of them might not, right? Some of them might not say anything. And I heard boys talk a lot less than girls. If you have boys, is that true? That's what parents always say. Well, the boys don't really talk in middle school. The girls will tend to chat, but the boys, we need to teach them how to problem solve. So if they're stressed out or they have a situation, asking them, what do you think you could do? I always say to kids that don't communicate, hey, I have this other boy or girl I'm working with, and this is their situation. What do you think they should do? And they always are able to come up with a solution. Some counselors in the schools will have like a solution notebook where every time the kid goes to the social worker or the counselor, they write down their problem, and then they have to come up with a solution together. And then the next time the kid goes in, they can review the notebook, find a problem another kid had, and look at the solution. And the good thing about that is a lot of your kids think they're the only ones that may ever feel anxiety or may ever feel sad. But the reality is when kids come to our center, they're always so happy because they look around the waiting room and the kids all look normal. And that's what they always say. Well, why is that kid here? That kid's popular. I recognize that kid. Or that kid looks, like they're wearing a football jersey and I know where they go to school. Like, why is that kid here? It's not like it's all normal, like to them, it's normalized a little bit. And so when you start to let them know that other kids struggle, and that's one of the things I will say, because I work with U.S. Soccer, I work with college teams, I work with high school teams, and the kids are always like, wow, they have problems too? And it's realizing that these are the skills that as we teach our kids these skills, a lot of their mental health will improve, but we don't always give them opportunities to teach these skills. What do you think is like the obstacle to, because as parents, we want to intervene quick and relieve and make them comfortable. With other parents? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. 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 And it was interesting. I was talking to a young lady yesterday and I noticed she was like really talkative with me in the office and she was like vibrant. And then we went out in the waiting room and she was with her parent and me and other people. She became very quiet and kind of cowered and became very like sullen. And we talked about, you have to practice acting like a confident person would. So her and I have been practicing making eye contact and, having a louder voice. And, there's a girl in her school that gives her an ugly stare, and we practice giving an ugly stare back and rolling your eyes because that's what you do when you're in sixth grade. You give an ugly, right? I mean, you have to know that skill if you're in sixth grade. But it's about teaching them how to kind of behave. So when you're with them, honestly, and you're eating meals, encourage them to act like they should act when they're eating a meal. Manners, eye contact, no phone. You want to start teaching them some of these social skills. And it sounds silly, but a lot of therapy is about behavioral, like redoing some different behavioral stuff. And the more you can get them to even have, conversation just in meals and, come together in the car, when they're with you, eye contact, they're not on their phone, they're talking to people. The more we can help them connect to other people, the better they're going to feel and the more confident they're going to feel. And I know some kids are harder than others. I know some kids aren't going to want to do this. We're hosting a movie in Barrington in 2 weeks. It's called Screenagers Elementary, and we bring parents and kids together, and we watch the documentary together. And whenever we do things like this, the kids always say the adults are on their technology too much. Don't tell us that we're on ours, because parents and everybody's always multitasking and they're not talking to us with full divided attention. It's interesting to hear them say that. These are just something that, obviously, we all try to achieve. If you have a child, like we talked about last time I was here, and you're concerned about technology and you're concerned about interfering with sleep or nutrition, something just to think about. If your child's on medications, we know that nutrition can be impacted and they might not eat as much lunch at school. We want to make sure they're getting snacks. As adults, we want to make sure that we're following some of this for ourselves. Otherwise, it's going to be difficult, just in the parenting and making sure we're taking care of ourselves. Eating, I would just say, there's a lot of talk now about diet and fads and, everything that's out there. And we're seeing a lot of commercials about different medications and drugs. Our kids really listen to what we're saying about our bodies and about food. And they will say, well, mom's always saying or dad's always saying he needs to lose weight or he needs to exercise or this or that. really be mindful of kind of the language you use around how you talk about yourself, because they pick up on that. And a lot of the kids I'm working with right now are really struggling with body image and just different eating disorder patterns. And so we're really trying to kind of look at helping them to understand it's about fueling, it's about health. It's not about, what they're seeing on Instagram and everywhere else. Because that's a big thing right now, right? If you go on Instagram, it's all about like exercising, losing weight, and these kids are just getting inundated with this stuff. And a lot of them are then not eating lunch, and they're skipping meals, and they're trying, and these are a lot of the athletes too. This is what we've been seeing, we see a lot of in our center. So we see, obviously anxiety. We see a lot of anxiety and depression, tech addiction. We see substance abuse disorders sometimes starting as young as middle school. You see that some talk, and you see different things. They might even start experimenting at that point. They might be at homes, with older siblings. They get it talked about. You have to be mindful that you're monitoring the apps on their phone, because a lot of the high school kids that do sell, different things do it through Snapchat and Instagram. And so you have to be mindful that kind of what's going on there, eating disorders and self-harm. And this isn't the complete list, but these are some of the things that our kids are aware of. They hear this talked about. Does any of that surprise you? Anxiety is one that's been interesting. ADHD is a big one that's coming up now. A lot of people are trying to get diagnoses of ADHD and autism and anxiety. If you talk to a medical professional, if you talk to a doctor, just be mindful. Some of the diagnoses kids might have as teenagers, they might not necessarily have as adults. Sometimes things don't always get correctly diagnosed. Make sure you're kind of putting some, just don't take it and run with it, right? So I had a 15-year-old the other day diagnosed as bipolar. Mom was freaking out. We talked about kind of what it was about, what the symptoms were, kind of how we were treating the symptoms, but not to kind of turn it into something else. We have a tendency to overuse the word anxiety a little bit too. It's normal to have stress. We want to make sure that it's not too much stress, but it's a healthy balance. Everyone feels some anxiety. Our goal is not to take away someone's anxiety, but as parents, a lot of times we want our kids to be happy, but we forget that part of them being healthy is them learning to have feelings and different kinds of feelings. So these are the things you will hope that your children struggle with, and learn how to struggle with these things well. When I started the program at Alexian Brothers, I built a lot of the curriculum around this. I wanted the kids in the program to learn how to be uncomfortable. So we would practice scenarios where they were uncomfortable. I would practice with them in different school settings, whether they're playing sports or they're playing, they're doing something difficult in school. We would practice being uncomfortable, asking for help. Any opportunity you have to have your kids ask over you asking, teaching them how to ask, teaching them how to advocate for themselves, especially the last one, helping them learn how to solve their own problems. And if as a parent you have anxiety yourself, it can be really hard, because we don't like to watch other people be anxious. So a lot of times we get really like, I want to fix this, I want to go in, I want to intervene. Anxious people don't typically worry that everything's going to go well. They think about all the things that can go wrong. And we do that a lot of times as parents. This is just a list of things a group of middle schoolers and high schoolers came up with. These are the things that they're saying cause them stress. I showed you some of these before, but I wanted to kind of show it again. So these are things that our kids commonly say. And so sometimes I will have them circle. When they're with me, I will have them circle which ones cause them the most anxiety or stress. And we can kind of talk about it a little bit. Any of those stand out? A lot of it is kind of sharing. It was funny because I wasn't sure what that was either, and the kids kind of wrote that down. Sharing, sharing on social media, sharing too much with other kids, and having it run. I didn't even see that one. What do I think is the most common?
Yes, two most common of each category.
I think it depends because kids are different. I think there's a group of kids that's definitely attachment to academic validation. I think then there's kids that feel like they cannot be successful in school, and so they go the other way. I think sometimes, and I always ask kids, do you feel like you can be successful in school? And sometimes they say no. So I think it's some kids, I think it can be the fear of failure. That's a big one for a lot of kids. Self-perception, fitting in middle school is huge. In younger grades, I mean, I would say fitting in too. Middle school is a big time where you're highly sensitive to what other people think. A lot of things, there is bullying behavior, and sometimes kids are just really sensitive. I mean, kids are not that nice in middle school, and when I talk to middle schoolers, I teach them how to respond to different situations that come up versus telling, anything, telling them to run to the teacher. We first talk about practicing how to handle it, because some of the situations are more minor that they're really upset about. And if they learn to respond a different way, a lot of times it changes. Does that make sense? So sometimes too, be careful when your kids run home with a story, not to run with it, but kind of stay calm and say something like, how did you handle it? What could you do? Because if they come home, and I hear this too, my teacher said to me, they hated me in front of the whole class. And I'm like, did they really say that? Well, not really, but they said, did you do your homework? Oh my gosh. But like as a parent, we get all upset sometimes and we're like, oh my God, I'm calling the school. Like, let's march in there. But maybe the story is like a little bit off. So what you could do is ask them like, what did you do? How did you handle it? What could you do tomorrow? And try to get them to start thinking, because the more we can get them to manage some of these situations, obviously if it's a safety issue or if it's a really big thing, you want to also notify the counselor of the school depending on the situation. But you want to arm them because they're going to act based off of how we respond. So stress versus anxiety, obviously, if you have a lot of like family stress in your home, there's transition, there's things going on, there's like a lot of stress for you. If you're thinking in your head, gosh, my life is so stressful, your child is probably having some of that too. So sometimes there's a lot of stress in our home that can make us feel upset. It's going to happen for everyone, right? We're all going to have stress. We're all going to have family issues. We're all going to have family things happen. But just understand that sometimes when there's a lot of stress in our home or with us, it could impact our children. So that's a little bit different than anxiety. Just because they may seem anxious, that might be more they're having a hard time dealing with stress. A lot of times new things are uncomfortable. I have a girl that plays basketball. She was moved to point guard from forward. It freaked her out. Then she had a panic attack. She didn't want to go back in and play. New things can be uncomfortable. Part of it is teaching people to be comfortable being uncomfortable and practicing the things that make you anxious. And that's evidence-based treatment, and it really is the only way to treat anxiety. I used to be terrified of public speaking. I wanted to throw up like 2 weeks before I ever had to do it. I was nervous. I hated it. But I knew the only way to get past it was to continue to just put myself in situations where I had to do it. That's why a lot of times when I go to school meetings, I mean, and they're doing accommodations and they say, well, this child's anxious, so we're not going to ask them questions, or we're not going to, we're going to put them in a padded room and not stress them out. It's not evidence, but there's nothing in there that's going to help the anxiety and build the confidence. The only way to help pure anxiety is by doing the things and learning to manage the discomfort. Again, it's not about it's success. It's not perfection. It's going to take time. It's like when I teach a student a coping skill, I have to teach them that you're not going to do like a technique, and they love to do this. It didn't work. I mean, I tried it. My favorite is I had a kid that kept going to the social worker office, and I said, well, you can't go to the social worker's office until you've tried these 3 coping skills for 2 minutes each and recorded before and after, kind of how your numbers were. And they were like, forget it. That's not too much work. I'm staying in class. But it was teaching them that it takes time. If you're going to do a strategy, I give them the little stand timers. You have to sit for 2 minutes and watch and see if your physical symptoms come down a little bit. It's not like you're just all of a sudden going to be happy or calm. We carry it in our body. So a lot of times our physical symptoms, we have to learn to bring our breathing and things down. And that's where it goes to the realistic expectations. And a lot of times kids will go ask a teacher for help. and they'll go stand at the desk and the teacher will look busy or not have a friendly face. Some teachers don't have friendly faces, and the kid will stand there and then just walk away, and they'll say, I asked my teacher for help, but they didn't say anything. So they don't know how to maneuver some of those situations, and so a lot of times we role play those. Again, anxiety is simply excessive worry. It's thoughts, right? When you start to get anxious, you start to ruminate, you catastrophize. Again, anxious people don't worry. Everything's going to go well. You know, I tell people, why don't you worry it's going to be a great night? Or why don't you worry everyone's going to be happier? Everyone's going to like you. But they worry all the things that can go wrong. So we teach, you know, thought reframing, looking at the evidence, trying to be in the moment. You know, we teach how to kind of manage some of those thoughts. And as a parent, you know, you want to be mindful that when you see a child in an anxious state, you don't want to do a lot of talking because it's going to make it worse. You want to stay quiet and kind of co-regulate with them. If you've ever had like an anxious kid, like in the morning before school, and they're sitting in the front seat and they make you anxious and you start asking them if they're okay, what happens? They fall apart. No, I'm not okay. You know, versus you just stay quiet, you drive them to the front door, you have them get out, and then they go in school, and then their anxiety starts to go down. But when you mess with it and you text them while they're at school, or you're intervening, or you're kind of standing over and you're hovering over them, you're actually making them more anxious. It's kind of like the flight attendant on the airplane. You know, again, I always refer to that. If there's turbulence, you're going to look to that person, and if they seem calm, collected, you're going to feel better. But if that person is running around hugging you and giving you towels and blankets and, you know, rubbing your head, what are you thinking? We're dying. We're all going down, right? So this is the hardest thing for parents to do. It was hard for me too. But the only way to heighten anxiety is by avoid what makes you anxious. You know, reassure, you know, you're going to be good. You're going to be fine. You're going to be amazing. You're wonderful. I love you. You're going to win the basketball team. Everyone else should love you because you're great. That is going to heighten anxiety. In fact, the gifted kids are my hardest anxious kids to treat because they've been called gifted, and that puts an expectation on them that they can't make mistakes. And so whenever kids hear like you're really bright or you're really gifted or you're amazing or you're a superstar, then their anxiety can go up because they feel like they have to maintain this unachievable level. Does that make sense? So distraction too. A lot of times it's sitting, helping kids sit with it. We have 10 exercises we do, and they're called interoceptives, and all 10 exercises can make you feel physically anxious, from feeling like you want to pass out or you want to throw up or, you know, something like that. One of them is like shaking your head from side to side as fast as you can for a minute or 30 seconds, and then you start to feel dizzy. And we sit down, I did this with a middle schooler last night. We did one of the activities, and then we got all like lightheaded and our heart was going fast. And then we just sat down and we did nothing. And we practiced how our physical symptoms go down on their own. And then sometimes in therapy, we will match that with an exposure. So have them do something that's uncomfortable for them while they've done one of those exercises. But that's more down the road. So just think, you don't have to answer, you know, think about the situations that cause your children to be anxious or uncomfortable. Think about situations that cause you to be anxious or uncomfortable. How do you respond when you believe your child is anxious? Maybe they make an anxious look. Maybe they have an anxious face. Maybe they're doing something. Do you reinforce their avoidant behaviors, or do you maintain expectations? So one, and I used to, I'll never forget this girl. She was a freshman in high school, and she had a lot of, I work a lot with kids with medical issues, and she had a lot of medical issues, and doctors couldn't really find anything, but she had had like procedures, she had gone to different doctors, and she had missed a lot of school, and mom worked a lot. And when, because the girl was sick, mom was staying home more, mom was taking care of the girl, and they couldn't figure out why they couldn't get her to start feeling better and going back to school. Part of the reason is what happened is when the girl was sick, all of the expectations changed. She wasn't expected to go to school. She wasn't expected to perform in the classes. She wasn't expected to help out around the house. Mom was home with her. Mom was taking care of her. Mom was a different mom. And this is what the girl ended up saying in a family session. Mom was a different girl, or mom said, she's a different mom when I'm sick than when I'm healthy. And she goes, I like the mom that I have when I'm sick. Now, of course, we couldn't stay that way because that wasn't healthy. What we did is we worked with mom and her on connecting more, being more present, having more. She had too much pressure on her at home and at school. We helped alleviate some of that. But what happens is when our kids have, anxiety or are medically sick, we don't want to change the expectations, because what happens is then we start creating different behaviors. So if your child is too anxious to go to school, they still don't have electronics, even if it's because they were anxious. If your child has migraines, you still, on days that they're home because they're migraines, you want to be careful that you're not making it too appealing to have migraines and be at home. Does that make sense? Because this is how stuff starts to patternize. These are situations, I know you probably can't see this because it's really small. These are situations sometimes we practice with kids. These are things, this was one list that I had for one, I think he was a 7th grade boy. These were some of the things that really caused him to be uncomfortable at school. So we practiced some of these situations. This is more than my friend I like how she put this slide together. I know a lot of kids that have anxiety can also have some behavioral externalizing behaviors. So we're going to touch on that. This is just more if there's anxiety, you want to be mindful of not reassuring a child with anxiety. And so like if you have a child that is asking you a question, I always say like, are you trying to solve a problem or are you just like spewing or venting? And if they're trying to solve a problem, great. But if they're asking you the same question, seeking reassurance, am I going to be okay? Can I do this? You don't want to continue to answer the same question over and over. Do you guys understand what I mean by reassurance? And it's the same thing with confidence. You can tell a child they're wonderful and amazing, but you want to tie it to something real. Because otherwise, like, I really like how you did that. I really like how, even though, that girl wasn't very nice to you yesterday, you were still nice to her today, or that you were able to go back and ask that teacher for help, even though, I know you have a hard time with that teacher. You want to kind of validate that, but the reassurance stuff really is what maintains the anxieties. Also, one thing I learned that was helpful for me, but I know I made this mistake a lot, is just how we label our kids sometimes. This child's really shy, this child's really anxious. If we over and over are saying, well, this child can't handle a lot, they're just so anxious, this child's so fragile, this child's a pain in the ass. However, but sometimes just be mindful, they're hearing how we're labeling them. And all of our kids can be a pain in the butt sometimes. I mean, there's going to be times you don't like your kid. We talked about that last time. I mean, it just is how parents are. You're going to want to kill the child at different times. But being mindful of what we're saying about them too. These are things that we see with kids that are more depressed, or even as us as parents. So if you notice any of that stuff, that can be a little bit of depression. Sometimes being mindful of their relationship with their phones. You want your child as much as possible to be around you and family if it's possible. I shared last time I had a girl that was in 7th grade and mom brought her to me for suicidal thoughts and depression. And she was another one that this was kind of a quick turnaround, but she was isolating in a room on her phone and she was researching stories on YouTube about depression, and mom was dealing with her own issues. So mom wasn't as present. And the girl was kind of getting more and more depressed. So one of the things we did is we brought the girl out of her room and said all devices could only be used in the main living area. And mom was more cognizant about spending time with her and talking, and her depression started to lift, and things turned around. But she was isolating in a room on her phone, which was making this worse. These are things that we also do, and I don't always use the word anxiety up there. Sometimes we'll say anger or depression. Sometimes we'll do 0 to 5, but we have them recognize their physical symptoms at different stages. So let's say it's anxiety. We might say, okay, they might come up with 1 is like, I'm calm. 2 is an anxious thought. 3 is I'm starting to sweat. 4 is my heart. 5, 6, and we go up there, and then we talk about kind of how to relieve some of those physical symptoms. So if you're at an 8 and your heart's racing really fast, and you use a coping strategy or coping skill for a couple minutes, it's going to go from like an 8 to a 7 or 8 to 6. You're still going to be uncomfortable, but it's going to be a little bit less. And we talk about kind of thoughts that we have that go along with it. And usually those thoughts are, what if this happens? Try to predict, catastrophize. Do you guys have any questions about that? A lot of the kids in elementary, and I have a lot of younger therapists working for me now, and they teach me so much. But this is a trick. A lot of middle schoolers and elementary kids love Canva. Okay, they love it. And maybe not all of them, but the ones that I've worked with love Canva. It's like this the computer app that you can make things and stuff like that. But they make these like Pokemon kind of cards and trading cards now. And she's been making them for all the kids based on what they like. And it's got their coping skills and it's got all these things. And one of the kids was selling them in one of schools, which is fine because they're coping skill cards. So if you want to sell them, go ahead. But it was interesting, but they're making them on these little cards that they're putting in their binders, and they're designing them, and we're laminating them for them, and they're like trading them, but it's all about like coping skills and strategies. And it was funny how much they liked it, and they like kind of learning that they have some control over things that they can do, but it's just important that we teach them the right way how to do it. This is a big one, executive functioning. We do a lot of this at our center. We have an executive functioning coach that the biggest group that we're serving right now is college kids, because there's so many kids that are going off to college that do not have these skills and are not doing well. And so the parents are coming in, having us work with them on combining counseling and executive functioning. And it sounds silly, but time management, knowing how to prioritize work, knowing how to ask for help, knowing how to, focus on a task. A lot of kids, and you want to be careful with like the ChatGPT and all that stuff, because kids are trying to use all this stuff. And the big thing now is they're all trying to find sneak around ways to do less work. So learning these things, but these are things that if you can help teach them at home, where to do your homework if you have some, having a clear area, how to manage some of that stuff, how to, does that make sense too? Lots of college kids. We had a parent just told us the kid had straight Fs the first 2 years of college, and in one semester has like all A's because learned how to manage and learned how to prioritize. A lot of times when kids aren't doing well in school, they don't know how to do well, and they don't feel good about the fact that they are going to be able to do well. And so when you start to teach them some tricks that will help, it does make a big difference. These are some of the other strategies I know she uses a lot. We talk a lot about like strengths and weaknesses and recognizing your strengths, but also embracing your weaknesses, understanding that we all have shortcomings. There's no one that's great at everything. And how do we continue to improve on the strengths, progress over outcome. And talking about too, what's one good thing that went well today and what's one thing that was hard for us, because a lot of times we get very in our head and it really, we're not always remembering all the good stuff. So our kids are experiencing all kinds of emotions. Sometimes kids can get very outwardly angry. They can be mean, they can throw things, if you tell them they have to do something, they're going to say, no, I don't, but they're not going to say it that nice. We try to always give kids choices, but recognize there's always a lot of emotions going on at one time. We can't just label one thing. It's not just, if your child's screaming and yelling and throwing things, it's not just that they're anxious. They might be mad, they might not want to do something, and they might have learned that behavior gets them what they want. If I scream and yell and punch a wall, then I don't have to do X, Y, and Z. If I start a fight, I don't have to. And sometimes it's just about not knowing how to control their emotions and regulate. And if you have a child that struggles regulating emotions, it's more important as parents that we regulate too. Discussing challenges, and then this is one that we do a lot, something that you're grateful for, something that was something that went good and something that was hard today. You guys, in terms of goals, what would you say are some of the goals that you guys have for your kids out of your parenting? What would you want to teach them out of your parenting? Some parents will say, I want my child to be more confident. I want my child to be kind. Yeah, yeah, that's a huge one. That's a huge one. And you can set up little situations and even practice. And some kids are more quiet, but the more they can kind of practice, even like going into a store. I'll take kids into Walgreens sometimes. And it's so funny because like everybody's in their own head. And I'll always like, I got this from my husband. I'll always address the person by their name. And the kids are always like, how do you know everybody? And, I'm like, they have a name tag. That's why they're wearing the name tag. You say, hi, Sally, what, where is, but have them practice like doing those kinds of things. Cause the more they practice, I remember the one gentleman I worked with at Alexian, he would have people like go into Walgreens and they had to ask the Walgreens worker where Walgreens was. Like silly stuff, because that's your worst fear, right? That you're going to say something stupid and be humiliated. So we would have people do stupid stuff and be embarrassed, and because you realize how it's silly it is. But the more they practice whatever it is that they need to work on, the better things will be for them. Obviously routine helps. Routine helps kids with mental health, especially mental health, autism, ADHD, anxiety. They do better with consistency, routine. Those kids typically struggle going into school after being a couple days out of school. They struggle with any kind of big change or transition. So the more you can have some routine, it's usually better for them. But they will fight it. They don't always like it. A lot of times these are the kids that like to stay up way late on the weekends and do all this other stuff, but they don't rebound well. And it's understanding that we're seeing kids across the board right now are seeming a little bit kind of quirky. They're seeming like they're having a little bit of a hard time like connecting and being kind to one another. And even reading social skills. Like one of my middle school, and I didn't even tell him not to do this, so I feel bad for the teachers, but him and his buddies were sitting at lunch and they were calling all the pizza places and prank calling. And I was like, that like they can see your phone number, right? But he was like so excited to make a friend, and this is what he came up with. I didn't want to tell him like that wasn't a good thing to do, so I let him have his crank calling. But they don't know what to do. A lot of these kids, they don't know how to socialize. Like I had a girl, this girl nudged him, and he thought she was nudging him, and he didn't. He went and nudged her back, and then she went and told the teacher, and he got in trouble. But like he wasn't trying to do anything, but he didn't know. These kids are just really lacking across the board in social connection, knowing how to interact, knowing how to be kind. And we have to really work on teaching them because it's across the board. I mean, I can't tell you, we're flooded with calls of parents of all ages saying we're concerned our child might have like autism or something's wrong. And it's not, it's just across the board. These kids are struggling. And everything is a text. I told that person off, or I had this conversation, and then you realize the whole thing was on a text Snapchat thing that can be erased. So they need to learn how to have conversations. So as much as you can try to prompt some of that, model it, they need a lot of practice in this area. We're seeing a lot of across the board issues with it. So allow them. I know we don't have a lot of time. I always say, ask them, give them choices. If you say you have to a kid, they're gonna put their feet in the ground. Allow them to make mistakes and screw up. Allow them to think on their feet within reason. I have a kid just recently I was dealing with, and he has not had a lot of consequences, and unfortunately, he is having a big consequence right now at the age of 21. And that consequence is going to cost him some time. So this was a kid that just never had to have consequences for some of his behaviors, and he took things too far. And I'm not using that as an example to scare you, but our kids need boundaries and they need limits, and us teaching them boundaries and saying no and having them hate us during middle school is normal. I mean, they're going to hate you for periods of time. And if your, kid is like my parents, the coolest parent, they're my best friend and I love them, and you're having parties and all this other stuff, which you might run into in high school, you're not really helping them learn boundaries. In fact, you want your child to learn how to say no. Think about when they're in a romantic relationship, they need to learn to say no. Think about when somebody's offering them, they need to learn to say no. Us teaching them by us saying no is actually a good thing. It teaches them that it's okay to have a boundary. And you can even say, this is my boundary. You are not going to yell at me. I'm not going to be talked to like that. This is my boundary. You're not, you know what? This is how you are going to follow the expectations. But the kids that don't get to learn the word no, it becomes a problem later on because they don't know how to say no. The other one is, avoid saying like, you'll be fine, don't worry about it, it's going to be amazing. I always love the one when, and I heard a principal do this one day, and it was like during the pandemic where parents were outside like yelling and everybody was like and the principal, right before I got on to speak, the principal said to everybody, "You're going to have a great day," to all the teachers. And I was like, that's a crock of crap. It's not gonna be a great day, but we say that to kids, it's gonna be a great day. Today may suck, but you can do it. You can manage it. I have faith that you're gonna be able to deal with even hard situations. Today may be really hard for you. I know that you don't want to go in that situation, but I believe in you, and I can't wait to hear how you dealt with it. So that is kind of it, and I wanted to leave some room for questions. I know a lot of this material, it's not about saying don't be kind to your child, don't be empathetic, but it is about being purposeful. So we want to be purposeful, and we want to spend time talking to our children when we're both in a good headspace. I love going on walks, and they may hate the walk with you the first 5 times you go, but if you make it a routine, it's normal for kids to not want to be around their parents. But if you say this is something we're going to do like every Saturday morning or every, whenever, for the first 5 minutes of every car ride, after the 5th or 6th time of them being mad about it, they will adjust. Does that make sense? And so it really is about just being purposeful. If they're calm and we're calm, have those conversations. If you have a child that's old enough to have a phone and they have Snapchat or message, you can message them, get to their level. Some parents do the journal thing where the parent will write in the journal and the kid will write back in the journal, and they do a lot of their major like communications through the journal. Some will just go on like fun events or play games, try to figure out what it is that they're interested in. If you are talking to them and you feel like they're wrong about something or you guys are having a disagreement, try listening to them before you tell them they're wrong, because they're going to say things that might really alarm you. You might hear everything from the minute I'm 18, I'm moving out and I'm never going to see you again. I'm dropping out of high school. I'm going to get my license when I'm 12 and I'm driving out of here. Whatever they say, just be like, wow, that's interesting. Tell me more about it. Because they're going to be on to something else, but they want to tell you about it. They want to express all their silly ideas. And even if they say something off the wall that you don't agree with politically, maybe they say, I'm never believing in God again, all kinds of things that can derail parents. Keep in mind, it's just them expressing themselves. So let them express themselves. It's not about disagreeing with them. It's about learning their perspective and learning where they're coming from. So think about some of this stuff. No one's going to be perfect as a parent. I've made every mistake and my kids somehow turned out okay. But there are definitely things I wish I would have done different. I wish I would have taught my kids, especially my younger one, more about money and budgeting and like that. We wish I had spent more time on that, because she is like me and we're bad with like savings and money. And but think about kind of what you want to teach them. And just because your child is struggling right now does not mean that they're not going to be super successful. Kids are going to struggle. There's going to be times where you're like, oh my God, I totally screwed this one up. Thank God I have 2 more. But I've had some of the hardest kids, and they are like the most successful adults now. Some of my kids I worked with are parents now. So it comes around. So you have to put it in perspective. Your kid might be really quirky and have no friends now, but I told the mom this last night, at least they're not going to be the kid out having sex and getting drunk when they're 15, most likely. So every parent's got a different worry. Every parent's got a different concern. You have to have faith that it's a process. And if you do what you know and what's in your control, they do move through it and they do evolve and they find their own. So don't worry. I mean, I hated school as a kid and I struggled and I turned out fine. And it's funny, like everybody's different. You guys, just be kind to yourselves, because as parents, we can be our harshest critics. And then more we can say nice things to ourselves. And remember that other parents on Facebook and Instagram, they're not really as happy as they look. If somebody's posting on Instagram or Facebook, that usually means they're not happy, or why else are they posting, right? So thank you guys. If you need anything, you can contact us and let us know. And we also have an intern. We have a large intern program that sees kiddos and families for free or reduced cost too. So if anybody has any issues with insurance and they need any counseling or services, we can do that as well. And if you guys have elementary to younger middle school kids and want to take your kids to the Screenagers movie, it's going to be in Barrington in 2 weeks. Thank you, guys.